So let's get into your article first, and then we're going to get back to some of this. But I want to get into your article. I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a while now. This is from August, so it's been out a minute. But COVID-19 proves it's time to abolish predictive policing algorithms. So let's start out basic. What exactly is predictive policing and the algorithms? Like, what all does that refer to?
Sure. So an algorithm is basically just a list, right? It's just like you're trying to predict something based on what's happened before. So if you are currently accessed this show today by like clicking on a link on Twitter or clicking on a link on Facebook, then what the algorithms that really drive those platforms are doing is they're taking a look at your behavior on the internet and the behavior of people that they think are like you, and they're trying to predict other things that you might like. Like, so for example, Facebook really thinks that I want one of those bicycles that you can put a basket in the front and put like both of your kids in it and ride to the grocery store. They're like $1,500, $3,000 bikes. Facebook is correct. I would love one of those. I think that would be awesome. I would love to put 7 dogs, 5 kids, and like 15 hats in a frickin' basket and go and be that guy. I'd love to be that guy. Can't afford that right now. Facebook also thinks that I would like to rent a business wardrobe. I would not like to do that, not anymore. But based on other people like me, they made a calculated guess that that's something I'd like to do. And so that's a pretty low stakes decision. Like whether or not I click on like a fancy bicycle is not really a priority. It's not something that's going to hurt my life, but it gets a little bit more intense when does Facebook advertise to me about a renting opportunity or a mortgage if I'm Black or not. And there's been major cases with Facebook, like challenging them on and challenging companies like Airbnb on whether or not their algorithms discriminate against Black and brown people. It gets even more heavy when you're like, is this algorithm determining whether or not I get access to stage 2, 3, 4 in applying for a job? Often these algorithms are built saying, oh, this is unbiased. This is really fair. This is just taking math, data, and embedding it in a decision-making rubric. And it's not as racist or biased as like a human brain. It couldn't possibly be worse than that. When what you're doing actually is taking a look at data points that are just frankly pulled out of a structurally racist society, built on imperialism, built on chattel slavery. And it's just burying the practices that led to that data existing in ones and zeros, stamping science at the top and moving it forward. And I'm not saying all algorithms are bad, but I am saying that most systems that use algorithms are deeply screwed up and deeply structured to be biased towards white supremacy in American society. And so that's what's happening. Now, predictive policing is one of the highest stakes ways in which these algorithms can be used. Does a police department send a cop to your neighborhood trying to guess whether or not crime will take place? And what you find is that a lot of these tools, built in Chicago, built in New York, built in Philadelphia, end up just perpetuating broken windows policing, like the kind of policing where it takes really low-level stuff, like drinking a beer on a porch or public urination or possessing a tiny amount of marijuana, something of that nature. And it might the algorithm sends police to that neighborhood. It means that those kinds of activities are prosecuted or are arrested for a lot more. And also you have a lot of cops around, so there's other things that might get picked up. And it just perpetuates the over-policing and the opportunities for police brutality that have really plagued the United States for quite some time. The algorithms I understand the best, and it's still something I'm learning every day, is really around algorithms used in pretrial decision-making, which in the shorthand for that is bail. Like a lot of times, like if I get arrested, the sort of concept is that I would get seen by a judge and the judge would decide whether or not I get locked up and I don't get a chance to go home, or if I got released on something, I get released on my own recognizance, just with a promise to come back to court when my court date happens, or on something like bail. Bail was meant to be what's called a surety. Like if I give a certain amount of money, I'm going to want that money back, right? And so by giving that money, it's an incentive for me to come back to court and to not get arrested again. When really what we see is that all around the United States, bail is basically just used to lock primarily low income, primarily Black and brown people up. The vast majority of people in our jails are Black and brown. The vast majority are extremely, extremely poor. So predictive risk assessment algorithms were meant to correct that system, to say, well, shouldn't this algorithm just tell us who will be safe? Like who will come back to court if we let them go and who won't get arrested again? That's really what we care about, right? When again, algorithms, like I just described, are predicated on a practice of criminal justice, on the kinds of arrests I just described, which are really just super, super racist at their root. And so you find that the evidence is beginning to show when you look at independent studies of risk assessment algorithms, whether it's the incredible research done by Julia Angwin when she was at ProPublica of the use of these algorithms in Broward County, Florida, criminal justice decisions, or the academic research of Megan Stevenson, who studied the use of these algorithms in Kentucky. What you find is that these tools often will be twice as likely or more to be wrong about Black or brown people, calling them risky when they're not, and also that judges, when the tool says something that they don't agree with, like let that person go, if that person is Black or brown, they're a lot more likely to ignore what the tool says. And so the article that you lifted up before that I published in Wired was basically just trying to make a case based on how history has gone. Like often when we take a look at municipal governments, right? So a local city, the city of Philadelphia where I live, or a city like Atlanta, a city like Houston, a city like Detroit. These are governments that are often really, really strapped. They don't have a ton of resources. So when economic crash like is happening right now hits, and so they look at a budget, they look at a set of coffers that's more empty. And at the same time, you often are seeing, or sometimes you're seeing, some of the same causes, like same, root causes that are impacting the economic crash are also causing more poverty. So more people are in really desperate straits. So you might see more an increase in things called crime, right? And so if you're facing a budget deficit and you're facing more crime, you might be like, there's an app for that. Let's get an algorithm to predict where we should send our cops or where we should invest our resources. And that will help us be efficient while also dealing with the public safety question that's really on the table. And the argument that I wanted to make in that article was that actually that's the opposite of what we should do. When COVID hit in March, city after city after city, pushed by vibrant community bail funds and anti-incarceration organizations, as well as public defenders and other groups, were able to quickly take a look at the worst cruise ships in the world, which is your county jail, right? If you are that is the place where you're going to get coronavirus. And we saw rampant infections in jails. I think for a time, Cook County's jail in Chicago was literally the biggest coronavirus hotspot in the world, right? For example. And so we were able to get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people out of those jails at a time by just pushing on administrations to say, you can't leave people in there. They're going to get infected. Most of the folks in jails have, pre-existing conditions that could put them at great risk. They did not get a death sentence, get them out. So what risk assessment algorithms would tell you is that if you let all those people out of jail, dogs and cats living together, utter madness, you're going to have tons and tons of arrests, tons of problems, tons of people not showing back up for court. That did not happen. When we let all those folks out in those cities, what we saw is folks staying home. We saw folks getting supports that they needed that they couldn't get in jail. As courts started to reopen, people came back to their court dates. So I thought that it was some of the best proof that we'd seen that the idea of predictive policing, the idea of predictive pretrial algorithms, any kind of prediction when it comes to criminal justice, we don't need it. We have some of the best evidence that we've ever needed to say that instead of trying to predict someone's riskiness, what we need to be doing is reducing the chance that they're going to get caught up at all. We need to stop calling things that are about human survival, things like sex work or things like drug use, as crimes. We have to stop even making it possible that if someone gets arrested, in the vast majority of cases, that they spend a day behind bars. In the vast majority of cases, if I get accused of something, I should be able to confer with my lawyer, make an argument about what supports that I have or that I might need to safely show back up at court and go home with those supports and services, right? If I need them. And most people don't need anything at all. You might need a text reminder like you get from your dentist or your hairstylist saying, come to court tomorrow, something of that nature, right? And so that's the argument I was trying to make, that predictive analytics, we don't need them to end bail. We don't need them to keep communities safe. What we do need is investments in rec centers, schools, jobs, and food, all of the things that we've been fighting for, both in this moment around defunding the police and that abolitionists focusing on ending mass incarceration have been fighting for generations.
So where does facial recognition software fall into all this? Because I mean, the things that you're describing with predictive policing and these algorithms, you can also throw facial recognition software into the mix that has mismatches sometimes up to 98% of the time. and it is especially biased again towards Black and brown people.
Yeah, totally. So I've been really lucky enough to get to work with some of the folks who are really leading that movement. I was just on a panel last week at the Online News Association with Deborah Raji, who worked with Joy Brulamini at the Algorithmic Justice League, as well as with Sheeta Richardson, who came out of AI Now and is now a visiting scholar at Rutgers, and a great New York Times reporter named Kashmir Hill, where we talked about this exact issue. Facial recognition, and Joy and some of her other colleagues have proven this really strongly. Like, if you train an algorithm specifically on mostly white faces and it doesn't recognize Black faces, or it over predicts for Black and brown faces, then it is a piece of trash. And so they've made this extremely rigorous argument. And based on that argument, groups like Fight for the Future, as well as many others, have been able to work with cities like Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Lockport, New York, to be able to ban the use of those tools, whether it's in school settings or completely. I think Santa Clara County or Santa Cruz might have also just done the same out in California. So what's really exciting about the work that I get to do is it's both about getting rigorous human storytelling about what our lives are really like when we're caught up in systems like this, rather than what prediction says they will be, with great researchers like folks like Deb and Rashida and Joy and others who can really rigorously do the science and then work on a policymaking level to say we should ban these tools, we should reduce the harm, we should focus instead on divesting from this kind of carceral technology and investing instead in the resources communities really need.
What are some of those better investments, would you say, if you had to just, list what priorities should be?
Well, sure. I think that's been the really rigorous argument coming out of the movement around defunding the police and around what safety really means. When we talked, we're in the middle right now at Movement Alliance Project of putting a survey out into the community that's asking those questions, what do you want to be investing in the city of Philadelphia? And I believe the city of Chicago just did a poll that focused specifically where they were ranking priorities, and defunding the police was right up there. And so we're fighting instead here in Philadelphia for things like when we looked at the mayor's last budget that came during the middle of this coronavirus crisis, he zeroed out funding for parks and recreation, right? He zeroed out funding for adult education and youth workforce development, things that actually invest in what kids and young adults need in order to be successful at a time of austerity and poverty. It's stuff like that. It's not that deep. We need good jobs. We need good schools. We need good transportation, good food, and the right for everyone to live in dignity. And 15% of the Philadelphia entire budget goes to cops, 15%. And we, cut the arts office, right? Not that deep, we're not saying that we can't have police tomorrow, because obviously there's also major things in our society around harm that we haven't contended with yet. We haven't built real restorative justice apparatus in most of our cities, but we can start to make the police smaller and to divest from that institution and invest in some of the resources that I named. And you can turn to really grounded abolitionist organizations and leaders like Mariam Kaba or Andrea Ritchie for a lot more on that subject.
Right on.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it